He was just another person among them, unnoticed and insignificant. There was no wealth or powerful connections in his life, but on this day, he came to change everything. Who was this humble office worker that everyone ignored? Why did those who once laughed at him and tried to belittle him suddenly lose their high positions? No one knew he was the key to the business he had once built himself. Today, everything would change, and no one could have predicted that the true power lay behind his silence. The city of St. Louis, Missouri was home to an office tower that stood tall against the skyline, a gleaming symbol of prosperity and success. Its glass-paneled floors stretched high, housing expensive offices and high-end cafes where a cup of coffee cost as much as a decent meal. In this world of polished exteriors and material wealth, everyone sought to be seen, to flaunt their achievements. Success here was measured not just by wealth, but by the brands on their suits, the cars they drove, and the circles they moved in. Amidst all this glitter and grandeur, there was him, Brandon, a quiet, unassuming man in his 50s, with an outdated laptop and a worn-out work uniform. He was a fixture in the building, though hardly noticed. He moved through the hallways like a shadow, unnoticed by the fast-paced, high-powered individuals that filled the air with talk of deals and business ventures. His job was to clean, to make the place look presentable, and that was all. No one thought twice about him. He didn't speak much at meetings and was rarely invited to contribute. His presence nothing more than a silent background to the conversations that mattered. He had no connections, no apparent importance. He was just another worker performing his duties without complaint or fanfare, and everyone from the top managers to the young upstarts believed it would always be this way. They couldn't have been more wrong. The young top managers at Westfield Consulting, Emily, Jake, and Trevor, passed by Brandon every day without a second glance. To them, he was just another part of the office scenery, as constant and unnoticed as the vending machine in the hallway. They were caught up in their world of high stakes, expensive cars, and lavish vacations, discussing their latest conquests, both personal and professional. For them, success meant having the right connections, wearing the right brands, and being seen in all the right places. It was a world where those with less power or influence, like Brandon, were nothing more than invisible, beneath notice and beyond concern. Every morning, as they walked to their corner offices, they would brush past him, often with a mocking laugh or a casual comment under their breath. Emily, in particular, found Brandon a convenient target for her disdain. When he would quietly enter with his bucket and mop, she'd whisper to Trevor, "Someone really needs to put that old man in his place." She spoke with a sense of superiority, not even considering the possibility that Brandon was anything more than the janitor in their world. Brandon, as always, remained silent. His daily routine was predictable, a monotonous pattern of sweeping, mopping, and tidying up spaces that were already pristine in the eyes of those who mattered. He never complained, never argued, and rarely spoke. He was a man of few words, content to stay in the background, unnoticed. But in the quiet moments when his eyes lingered on the desks in the busy offices, there was something more, a flicker of thought, a hint of understanding that no one seemed to recognize. His presence, though ignored, was purposeful, and it was a calm strength that no one truly saw, nor ever would until it was too late. That day, Brandon entered the office unlike any other day. Instead of his usual work uniform, he was dressed in a sharp, dark blue suit. Gone were the mop and bucket he always carried. Instead, he held a briefcase. At first, no one took notice of the change. They assumed it was just another fashion misstep, an attempt at something he clearly couldn't pull off. But as he walked past the employees who were too preoccupied with their own concerns to glance up, something about his composure shifted the atmosphere. Brandon moved with a quiet confidence, and when he reached the central table where the senior managers sat, all eyes were still on their screens or their phones. Without a word, he set the briefcase down in front of the group. They hardly noticed at first, caught in their own conversations. However, when Brandon opened the case, the room fell silent. He pulled out a stack of papers and placed them in front of the CEO, who was in the middle of a phone call. For a moment, no one said a word. The CEO, still holding the phone to his ear, glanced at the papers briefly. His expression shifted from calm to one of visible shock. His hand trembled slightly as he placed the phone down, his face drained of color. It was as if he had just seen something that completely shifted his understanding of the situation. Brandon stood there, unwavering, his eyes scanning the room, but his face remained unreadable. There was no anger, no triumph, just calm determination. He didn't need to explain anything. The moment spoke for itself. Slowly, the other managers started to realize that the man they had so carelessly overlooked wasn't just another worker. This wasn't the same Brandon they had dismissed for years. The papers he had placed on the table weren't insignificant. And slowly, as the weight of the moment set in, they understood everything was about to change. No one could comprehend what was happening. Brandon, the man who had been nothing more than a janitor in their eyes, stood in front of them with documents that carried his signature. He wasn't just an employee of the company. He had founded it years ago in the early 2000s, when his ideas and efforts had been the driving force behind its rise to success. But everything had changed when his business partners had pushed him out of the company, using legal tactics to strip him of his control. Now, after all these years, Brandon had returned. He wasn't shouting, nor was he bitter. He wasn't demanding compensation or seeking vengeance. Instead, he stood there calm and composed, with the legal papers in his hands. Signed by his new attorney, these documents represented the return of what had once been his. He had waited patiently, observing from the sidelines, gathering his strength and preparing for the moment when he could reclaim what was rightfully his. The room grew still as the managers began to grasp the gravity of the situation. The documents Brandon had placed on the table weren't just formalities. They were the key to the future of the company. The top executives who had once treated him as invisible were now realizing that their time had come to an end. One by one, they felt the weight of the inevitable shift. Brandon didn't need to raise his voice or show any anger. His presence alone was enough. He wasn't a man driven by petty emotions. He was methodical, calm, and precise. As the reality of the moment sank in, it became clear. Brandon had returned not to demand power, but to simply take back what had always belonged to him. The silent strength in his posture, the quiet determination in his eyes was a power far greater than any forceful action could ever be. The game had changed and the rules were now in his hands. The young, ambitious managers tried to resist, their confidence crumbling in the face of the inevitable. Trevor, ever the outspoken one, attempted to intervene, his voice rising as he argued that Brandon couldn't simply take the company. He insisted that there must be some mistake, some misunderstanding. Emily, who had always seen Brandon as nothing more than a background figure, found herself on the verge of tears. She apologized for her dismissive attitude, for the years of mocking him, for treating him as less than human. Her voice trembled as she begged for forgiveness, but her words fell on deaf ears. Brandon, however, remained calm throughout the ordeal. He didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't stoop to their level. There was no need. His silence spoke louder than any angry words could. He simply placed the final set of documents on the table and allowed the gravity of the situation to sink in. With a quiet efficiency, the paperwork was processed and one by one, the managers received their dismissal notices. The room, once filled with the sound of arrogant laughter and confident conversation, was now eerily quiet. The very individuals who had once mocked Brandon for his insignificance now found themselves at the mercy of the man they had belittled for years. They realized they had not just lost their jobs. They had lost their future, the very foundation of their careers. The world they had built, fueled by arrogance and disregard for those beneath them, had crumbled in an instant. Brandon didn't need to make a grand speech. His calm demeanor, his unspoken authority, was enough. As the room fell silent, he quietly spoke, his voice steady and clear. Sometimes the most unnoticed person in the room is the one who has the power to decide everything. And you should never underestimate those who seem insignificant. The power had shifted and the lesson was clear. Those who overlooked Brandon had failed to see the true strength beneath his quiet exterior. It was no longer their world, it was his. When the top executives left the office, Brandon remained alone. He sat in his chair, staring out the window as the fading evening light cast long shadows across the streets of St. Louis. He didn't celebrate his victory. There was no need for loud gestures or showmanship. He wasn't the type to gloat or revel in his triumph. Instead, he quietly absorbed the moment, knowing that his time had finally come again. The office, once full of the voices and egos of those who had disregarded him, was now silent. He was no longer just the janitor, no longer the invisible worker. He had reclaimed what was once his, and in doing so had shown the true power that lay beneath his quiet exterior. There was no need for grand speeches or emotional outbursts.